Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to class this afternoon. Today we're going to be getting started talking about the p5.js JavaScript library. This is a 2-week module, so we'll be talking about this this week and next week. A lot of what we'll be doing with this is just kind of demonstration, because it's really just going to be trying to take this library that we're starting and like applying the things that it allows us to do with a lot of the other JavaScript and things of that nature that we've learned over the past 12, 11 weeks. Got about 3 weeks left, so the past 11 weeks of the semester. So we'll be writing, things like objects and things like, we'll be using arrays, and we'll be doing all this different sort of stuff. And a lot of what we're going to be doing in this course in terms of like demonstration and stuff will be done in these live streams. What I'd like to do next week is just spend an entire live stream just coding and writing code in p5.js, maybe trying to pick a problem and solve a particular problem just using p5.js and JavaScript and things of that nature. So we've got like the basics that are in the Blackboard module. I'd also like to point out some of the videos in there in the Blackboard module are from Daniel Schiffman, who has a YouTube channel called The Coding Train. If you want more on p5.js in particular, or programming in general, he's a professor at NYU that also has a really great YouTube channel where you can watch a lot of this stuff. And it's something that I really, it helps me out sometimes when I need, some new ideas or to try to figure something out. And I think it would probably help you all out as well. He's got a nice way of kind of breaking things down and explaining things. In terms of being an instructor, that's he's kind of one of my goals in terms of somebody that I'd like to be like one day. But we're starting to talk about p5.js, and it is a JavaScript library. Well, you know what? Don't let me get ahead of myself here. I need to make some announcements. Right, as we're getting started, it's important to note that we've only got about 3 weeks left in this course, which is pretty incredible. Like, we've got this week and next week for the p5.js module, and then the final week and couple days, however long it is, I don't quite remember right offhand, is just meant for you all to be kind of pulling together your final projects. So what I would like to do, which I think would be kind of interesting, is this week we're going to intro p5.js, just kind of start introing it, working through the JavaScript library. The next week, which is next week, I'd like to do kind of a whole program in p5.js, just kind of from beginning to end, maybe just kind of demonstrating different parts of the programming language. And for that last live stream, which would be, I want to say, December the 7th, I might have an extra long live stream. I might start it earlier and continue it later in the day. Because what I'd like to do for that one is do a game jam and just do an entire process of creating a game, kind of like what you're being asked to do for your final project. So just kind of do an entire process of creating a game using p5.js as a part of that project, or, basically to make the game, if you will, and just spend some time, just do the entire process online. Come up with an idea for the game, maybe make assets for the game, if I want to make graphics for it or find graphics for it or just use emojis, which is also fun. Build the game and then, have a finished game by the end of that live stream. So that live stream might go pretty long, right? It might be most of the day that day, I won't try to make a super complicated game so as not to be here until 8 o'clock at night working on this game jam. But I'd like to do a game jam, one, just to kind of give you a demonstration of making a game, and two, in solidarity with you all. Right? Since you're going to have to make a game, since you're making a game for your final project, even if it's just a simple game, I can make one too, right? And I wouldn't ask you guys to do anything that I wouldn't do, right? So I can make a game too for this. And it actually might be neat in the future if we get some really good games here. Something that might be neat would be for me to make a website that is like the Web 215 game website. Since this is the first time this course is being taught, I've not had any projects before. So I think that might be pretty cool. That'd be another great thing that you could use the coding train for, because he does a lot of cool games on there as well. The only thing that I would ask is that if you follow along with one of his things that he does, you tweak yours in some way to make it different. If you use, maybe you might use graphics, maybe you might, I don't know, change the gameplay slightly. Just change something a little bit to make it different, so that I can see that you did just a little bit more than follow this tutorial. And really, the project for this module too is pretty nice. Like, it should be pretty easy for you all to complete, because the project for this p5.js module in particular is just to make anything, right? As long as you use p5.js and it has some sort of interaction and animation, make anything, which is pretty cool. Like you should already be able to do that based on what's in the module. But we're talking about p5.js today, and this is a JavaScript library. And so one of the things that the course description talks about is this course using frameworks and libraries. And this is where we do that. This is where we use frameworks and libraries. Because there's one particular framework that's a big part of p5.js, which we'll talk about that in just a little bit. Right? It kind of forms the backbone of p5.js. And p5.js itself is a library. And so, since it's a library, that means that we can use all of the other stuff that we've done this semester in conjunction with the new things that we'll learn from this library. I know in other courses we've talked about libraries before. We've essentially said that a library is kind of like that. Like, it's kind of like a library, like the library here at Cleveland Community College. You go into the library, which is across the way here, and there's all sorts of sections with all sorts of books. And these books have things that people have already written for you, so you can read it and learn it. And when we're using a library in a programming language, that's essentially the same thing that we're doing. We have sort of a pre-written book here that has all sorts of information for you to utilize, right? So somebody's taken a bunch of other code and a bunch of other stuff, put it into some functions, and made it a whole lot easier for us. And so that's one of the reasons why we like to use p5.js. And so, before we really get into talking about p5.js itself, I think it's kind of important to talk about that framework that p5.js uses kind of as its backbone. And that is the Canvas framework, that HTML5 canvas, or the Canvas tag. And we've got a little bit of information in there about Canvas in the module. I've got a little video in there for you to watch, even though we don't really have to manipulate a Canvas element directly, right? That's one of the good things about using this p5.js library, is that p5.js handles our Canvas for us. But what I wanted to do is I wanted to show you that video that we have in the module. So you want to make sure to take time to watch that to see how to use Canvas in general. And then when you do that, you can really see just how much easier it is to use this with with p5.js to use this library to build upon that Canvas framework just makes our lives a whole lot easier. Canvas itself is a framework that allows us to create graphics. And so we're talking about graphics creation here. Right? Like we've seen all kinds of ways to insert graphics that we've created other places in other courses, right? You know, we know our image tag, we know our video tag, we know our picture tag, we know our audio tag. We can take these graphics and this multimedia and we can insert it into a website. But it was created elsewhere, right? We're just using our website to kind of display it. When we're dealing with a canvas, we're actually dealing with something that we can draw on and write on and create something with. You know, that's actually, you know, a common project with p5.js and Canvas in general is to make a drawing program. Maybe that'll be one of the things that we do next week, because that's pretty fun. To make a drawing program based on, you know, like essentially what you're doing is you're just drawing a circle where your mouse location is, and as you drag your mouse, you're drawing more circles, and it's kind of fun. And you're creating these elements on the fly. And JavaScript is the method that's used to create these elements. So when we're looking at the Canvas element itself, which is why we can kind of take that and push it into a p5.js library, the Canvas element itself is only a container. Right? It only provides us a foundation. It provides us a framework. So we have to use JavaScript to draw the graphics. So if we can use JavaScript to manage our container as well, then we can kind of take everything and encapsulate it into one library, which is essentially what p5.js does. You know, we can draw essentially whatever we want to draw. We'll primarily look at some of those basic shapes today, like boxes and circles. Essentially what I've got planned for you all today is a little more advanced example of what we do in the module, which is to create a bouncing ball. And then we'll do even more stuff next week. So we can create a box, we can create a circle, we can create different paths. We can add text, we can add images. One of the interesting things that p5.js kind of helps us to do easily is we can add like a webcam feed into our site, which might be something interesting to do because I do have a webcam hooked up, even though I don't use it. They bought me a webcam. I don't have it. I don't use it for these streams, but I got one hooked up, so maybe we could try that out. And you know, it is the backbone for p5.js, as we've mentioned. So what is this p5.js? Well, from the website, we're going to reference to the website a lot today. In fact, let me just go ahead and kind of bring it over here. Here's the p5.js website. From the website, we see that p5.js is a JavaScript library for creative coding with a focus on making coding accessible and inclusive for artists, designers, educators, beginners, and anyone else. p5.js is free and open source. We believe software and the tools to learn it should be accessible to anyone. So it's a really powerful library, right? We can do a whole lot of stuff with it, but it's also really simple. They've designed it to be simple. So it's something that we can approach after having a lot of experience in programming. We can take something like this and we can approach it relatively quickly. And we can move through it relatively quickly. Because it is one of these things where we can, you know, we already have a lot of background in a lot of the JavaScript and stuff. So we can use our knowledge of arrays, use our knowledge of conditionals, use our knowledge of loops, various other things to work with this and actually create some really cool stuff. Objects as well, even though the way we build an object with p5.js is a little bit different than the way we would build an object with our objects module, which was the last module. But we'll do that today as part of our example. right? And so one of the other things to note here is that p5.js is a JavaScript port of the programming library called processing. You can even see that, like if we look at the p5.js website again, we look up here at the top, we can see there are links to different processings. Processing, the main website also links us off to processing for Python, processing for Android, and processing for Pi, which is the processing programming language to be used on Raspberry Pis. And these are all essentially the same language. They're essentially the same library, but they've been taken and they've been put into other programming languages. The original processing, I believe, which is this, we can find here on processing.org, was built for Java. But we also have one now for Python. Android is probably, not sure which programming language they're using for the Android library. We can check that out really quickly. Let's see what it's built on. Looks like Java. So it's the Java processing, but specifically for Android. Maybe has a few different objects in it that you could use. Python, it's here for Python as well. And so it's a library that's been around for quite a while, right? Used a lot for things like generative art and making games, just because it does make things pretty simple. And so it's you can see, as it says here, you can think of your whole browser page as a sketch, and it's HTML5 objects for text, input, video, webcam, sound, whatever you want, right? So it's pretty cool, pretty flexible. We can do a lot of stuff with this. So we'll need to bring this website back in just a minute. So let me just slide it over here to my second monitor. Actually, technically, that's my third monitor, but it's okay. 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. I will say I don't know if anybody's watching live. I'm getting some YouTube errors right now. I might need to reboot my computer. But I'm also recording a secondary stream of this video, so if the YouTube recording doesn't work out so great, I'll have the video available for you to watch from the secondary stream. So p5.js is a JavaScript port of the programming library called processing. We can use that in multiple other programming languages, as we've seen. Now, one of the important things that we're going to want to use for this is the reference. And the reference guide is really robust and really incredible for p5.js. We can find it on the website there. We'll bring back the website in just a moment, so we can look at that very briefly. But there's two main things on the website that we can use as examples or references for us, and really it's their reference and their examples. And these help us out a lot because they're really descriptive. They use a lot of stuff, and that really just helps us kind of figure things out. So let me bring back that website again now. Here we go. And we see right here off the homepage, p5js.org. Right here off the homepage, we see we have the download, which we'll need in a little bit. But we have here in the middle of this first section, reference. So I'm going to click that to open it in a new tab. And examples. I'm going to click that to open it in a new tab. And so when we look at our reference here, it's all kind of sectioned out. It's sectioned out based on the type of thing that you'd need to use, right? So we see all of our different sections here for different things. Color, how we work with color, constants, working with the DOM, working with data, the environment as a whole, different events, foundation, input, output, utilizing images, utilizing different like rendering, lights and camera, working with math, working with rendering, shapes, structures, transformations, and typography. And so some of this, probably most of this, you probably won't worry about, right? But a lot of it you might, depending on the application that you need it for. And one of the things probably next week especially is we'll probably be referring to this a lot as we're trying to do stuff. One of the cool things that we can look at, like if we look at the events, we can see all of the different types of events. When we see them with parentheses beside them, that means that they are a function. So we need to write them as a function, right? So we can use like our mouse dragged function or our mouse moved function and call that function and put some code inside of that function. So it'll happen when that event happens. Same thing with key pressed, key released, key typed, key is down, and all these other things over here from mobile devices that we can utilize here as well. Lots of different, we can do something with the mouse wheel here, with a mouse wheel event. When somebody spins the mouse wheel, we can do something with that, which is pretty interesting. A lot of stuff here. Creating images, and when we click on one of these, like for example, in a minute we're going to make some squares, right? Which in this case they're called rectangles. There's also a square function, but we mostly just use our rectangles. We can click on one of these and we can see the entire reference here. It gives us the reference for how we can use these different things. We can see here, okay, if we want to draw just a regular rectangle, we can use our rect function, R-E-C-T, with 4 arguments, the first 2 being X and Y location, and the final 2 being width and height. So in this case, we have something that's placed 30 pixels from the left, 20 pixels from the top, 55 pixels wide, 55 pixels tall. Here, if we see if we add another argument that is going to round our corners, and if we add multiple arguments after that, we can add up to 4 additional arguments, giving us 8 arguments total. Those will round our corners with different radii. And so we can see all this information here that we can use. We can see our different parameters or arguments and how we can, what we kind of throw in there, which ones are required, which ones are optional. Right, we see here with rect, which is why I think we only really need rectangle and not square. You can see here you only are required to have the X value, the Y value, and the width. And if you have just the width, it'll make the height the same, right, and make you a square. Adding a number for the height is optional. But that's a lot of data with a lot of information here. We can see other events that are kind of in here, like window resized. What do we do? If the window resizes, what do we do? We can look at that. A lot of stuff to work with here, a lot of stuff to examine. But another good way to kind of use this is to use the examples page. And the examples page here gives us a lot of different things, gives us a lot of different kind of pieces of code that somebody has already done that we can use as examples to kind of follow, to do something for ourselves. Like I was using these objects examples the other day to kind of get prepared for this class today, so I could remember exactly what we're going to do to create an object in p5.js. So I clicked on one of these, I looked at their example, and it shows me how to create the object. In this case, they're creating a class called jitter that creates the object. That essentially establishes an object. I mean, technically, that's your object. But, you have this class that, you take this value bug here and make it an object of that class. In p5js, we use constructors to build our basics. We can also bring in these values from the outside when we call our objects, which is what we'll do with our example today. And then we can put functions inside of our class here, and these functions will be functions of that class. So in essence, this class works like a library. So you can see here, if I want to run this move function on this object bug, I can call bug.move, and that will execute this particular function. And that's actually what we're going to be doing today. In my big example, I have, we did the ball bounce. We do the ball bounce in the module. And I thought, what would be interesting is if we had multiple balls to bounce. So in order to do multiple balls bouncing all at once, we need to utilize an object to do that. So these examples kind of give us different functional examples of p5.js being used. Like we can see how we can load save JSON. A lot of these simulate ones are pretty interesting because they use like particle systems and things like that. Like let's have a look at which one's kind of interesting. I think the smoke one's kind of interesting. So we can see like we can have a smoke trail that kind of follows our mouse here. And we can see the code here that actually does that, which is a lot of code to create a particle system. So I wouldn't necessarily expect, us to be able to do that. But it's pretty cool. You'll also see that name a lot around here. Dan Schiffman of the Coding Train, because he's done an absolute ton for this community. Really incredible. So I recommend you look at the reference. We'll use the reference a lot for different things. I also recommend looking at these examples just to kind of, get the lay of the land with this stuff. If you want to do things, like if you want to play with it quickly and easily, they have this editor here. This editor has an environment that's already set up for you. So if you want to just do something quickly to kind of test it out before moving on to your project, you can do that. So I'm going to drag my p5.js homepage back to the other window really quickly because I'm going to want to, I'm going to need that in a minute because we're going to need the library file. Because the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to set up our programming environment. So we're actually going to get into the nitty-gritty of actually doing some stuff now. So we can set up our programming environment in Visual Studio Code. We're going to do that now, and there's also a video in the module that shows us how to do that. It's basically just like any other project, right? So as we're setting this project up, we need our HTML file. We might want a CSS file. The only thing that we'll really need that's going to be different is we need to bring in our library file, right? Because our code needs to know these special commands that we're going to be giving it. So without this library file, it won't know what we're talking about with using these special commands. So we need to bring in that library file either by downloading the library file from p5js.org or using the approved CDN from p5js.org. We'll look at that in just a second. And we want to add a specially named JavaScript file, or I like my JavaScript file that I'm using p5.js projects for to be specially named. Because, you can kind of segment and compartmentalize your JavaScript that way. If you have a regular script.js file or whatever you want to call it, .js file, for regular JavaScript for your site, and then utilizing a sketch.js file to specifically put your p5.js stuff in, just because, they use that sketch keyword. It's kind of easier to kind of put 2 and 2 together there. Then you can do that. But let's go ahead and swap over to the Visual Studio Code here. Let me find my window with that. Too many windows open. There it is. And let's create this project. I've already created a folder on my system, so I'm just going to navigate to that folder really quickly. We'll do it off stream. So I'm just going to navigate to where I've set up the empty folder for the files for this project, which is there, there, and there. So once we find that empty folder, we'll select that folder. And again, this is an empty folder, right? So we need to create ourselves some files. I'm going to set this up in the exact same way that I would set up any other project. I'm going to add an index.html. I'm going to add a style.css. And I'm going to go ahead and add my sketch.js. If you want to as well, you can go ahead and add a script.js as well. We'll go ahead and do that just for our purposes and just throw it in our code base just so we can see it, right? But, you know, again, that's kind of what I recommend to do, to kind of compartmentalize your regular JavaScript scripts that you might be writing for your site versus your p5.js that you're writing for that part. But let's just go ahead and add our skeleton in here using Emmet. We'll change the title to p5js demo 1. We'll add our style sheet, and we'll add everything else in here as links. So link rel equals style sheet href equals style.css. We'll add in the head, we'll add a script src equals, actually I can put both of these in the body. We'll put both of these at the bottom of the body. We will need to add ourselves a JavaScript in the head here in just a little bit. Well, let's add a script src equals script.js. Close that script tag. And we'll add another one for our sketch.js. And we'll put it right there. Good. So we can go ahead and save that. Now we have all of our files here, our style.css and our 2 JavaScript files inside of our project. So now we can grab our library file and bring it in. So we have choices here as to what we want to do when we download. Right, we can download the complete, if we want to download files, we can download the complete library, which if we download the complete library, you get what it says you get here, right? It's the p5.js library file, the p5.sound add-on, and an example project. If you download single files, which is probably more of what I would recommend doing, we have our regular full-size library file, our minified library file. Remember, we do full-size for development, minified for when we're ready to push it out into production. We just swapped files out. Or alternatively, we just use the CDN. So if we wanted to use the file, we could just download the file by clicking that. It'll download to our machine. I can take and copy that. We'll do that in just a moment. It's going to ask me to give them money. Maybe we should. Might be a good little non-profit donation here at the end of the year. There we go. Now it's opening up. Definitely need to reboot this computer, I believe. So we'll just cut this file from where it was downloaded. Paste it into my working directory that we have our project in. And so once we do that, if we go back to our project, we should see we now have a p5.js file inside of our project. And if we click that, we can actually see the entire library. This is the entire library. You see objects, you see arrays, you see conditionals, you see loops, you see everything we've talked about this semester in here, functions, all sorts of stuff. And you can see that it's over. Let me try to get to the end here. You can see that it's over 109,000 lines of code. So I want to thank them for 109,000 lines of code, which is 109,000 lines of code I didn't have to write, which is pretty nice. So we can close that. And we can put the script to that inside the head of our site. So this will be script src equals p5.js. And we'll close our script tag. So now that's in our project. Which is nice. We can do it that way. That's one way that we can do it. When it comes to where you put your p5.js script file into this project, I recommend putting it in the head. You can put it in the body as long as you make sure that you put it below, or rather above the other two files, so it loads first. Just because order of operations matters, right? Like if it tries to load the sketch file before it tries to load the p5 file, it won't know what any of the special lines of code that we have in our sketch file means, right? So it would be difficult to use, or impossible to use, really. Save that. So we can go ahead and start working with this as is. As always, though, I like to give a shout out to the CDN, just because the CDN is a separate file on a separate website that we can utilize. So if we click this CDN link here, it'll take us to another page on cdnjs.com where the officially hosted CDN can be found. And we can just copy the code from here. I can copy my script tag right here for the minified file, or for the full-sized file, or for the sound library. Any of that stuff. I'm going to take for the full-size library while we're developing it. I'm going to comment out that script tag that's currently in there with an HTML comment here. And we'll just paste that there. And we'll use the file on the cdn.js, or the cdn.js serves all those files through Cloudflare, so this is going to be super fast. It's going to work just fine for us. Going to take some weight off of our servers. Everything's going to be great. So we're going to save this, and now we're kind of ready to get started. We've set up our project, and we're ready to get to work. So when we are working with p5.js, there are two kind of main functions that are kind of required in every program. And those are the setup function and the draw function. And we can kind of add and change functions as we want to. But we need these two functions in every file, right? And these are functions that we write: setup and draw. And these two functions have two wildly different purposes. Our setup function, for example, is used to kind of form the foundation of what we're working on, right? That's typically where we kind of write our the information that's going to kind of create our canvas. And that sort of thing. Right, it's also the place where we would want to do like anything that we would want to kind of set up that would be important for kind of how our program can function. You know, it's basically the foundation that the rest of the stuff can be built upon. So we'll create our canvas here. We will, do a few other things here. Not a whole lot of code typically goes in the setup function. The draw function, on the other hand, is a whole lot more interesting. Because if you've ever done any studying in game development, or you've tried to look into game development, one of the things that you might hear people talking about is something called a game loop. And a game loop essentially is just some kind of loop that runs continuously during gameplay. And so it's just sort of this continuously running loop. Right, so our draw function here is going to be similar to one of these game loops. It's just a continuously running loop. And it's going to be going through and it's going to be processing user input, changing the game, changing the state of what we're working with, rendering things out, just in a consistent, infinite loop until we tell it to stop. We can tell it to stop if we want to, right? But it's just going to loop on its own. So while in most programming that we've done in the past, if you've been in the Python class or in the Java class, one of the things that we talk about is just how bad an infinite loop is. In this case, we get an infinite loop by default, and it's critical to making things kind of work for us. So let's add these functions in and basically just get started writing some code for a little while here. So let me bring back my p5.js project here. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to close the style.css and the sketch and the script.js. We'll leave open the index.html because we'll need it to run our live server, and we will leave open our sketch.js because that's what we're going to be working with. So let's switch over to our sketch.js file and let's add our draw function, our setup function, and our draw function, and then we will actually start to write some code. We finally made it to that point. So we just use our standard function notation for this. So we're going to write function setup with parentheses and our curly braces, and function draw with parentheses and our curly braces. So now we have fully our project ready to go. Right, we've got this infinite draw loop here that's ready to kind of render things out. And we've got this setup function here that's ready to take a few commands to get things started. Right, so what I'd like to start by doing is just creating a canvas. Right, remember that we need a canvas in order for us to work on this, because that HTML canvas, that canvas framework forms the backbone, forms the foundation of everything that we do in p5.js. So we need a canvas. So let's add our create canvas function into our setup function here. So we'll add a create canvas. Now, one of the painful things about using a library here is that our IDE doesn't understand the library. Right, so it won't give us auto suggestions for our library. That's why it's a good idea to have the documentation close at hand. But you'll notice here that's create canvas. The C in canvas is uppercase. Then we add some parentheses here. In the parentheses, we add these parameters or arguments. And in doing so, what we're doing is we're giving our canvas a width and a height. One of the things that you might want to do is maybe give it some kind of static canvas size, especially since it's probably going to be a part of a page, like for your final. One of the things that I like to do is I like to put this canvas width and height in variables so that I can use that width and height to do other things when I need it, right? Like if I need to say, bounce my ball off of this wall on the right-hand side, I can reference the full width for a pixel measurement of that right-hand side versus referencing a static number that I might have to go back and change later. Right, so let's create a variable, and this is, remember, just JavaScript, so we can create a variable, the same way that we would do it in JavaScript. So we can use our var keyword, var w for width. We'll make this 1280 by var h for height and 720. So we have our 720p resolution there. And now in my create canvas, I can put w comma h with my semicolon at the end. And so this has created my canvas for me. So if we save this here, we can run live server here on our index.html file. Open with live server. And this is what we have so far. You can't see anything, but if we right click, we can see that something's probably here. Right, because if I right click here, I don't get that normal right click menu. I get save image as, and I get copy image. Right, our canvas kind of acts as an image after it's been rendered. So we can actually save it as an image if we want to. If I click somewhere like in this lower corner, we can see we get that regular right click menu. And so from here, like we can do like view page source, and we can see that we've got some interesting stuff in here that we wouldn't have had before. Right. A lot of this is added by the live server stuff here. But we can see we got a canvas here. We got a canvas here. A canvas exists, and it's here. But we can't see it because it doesn't have a color. So one of the first things that we might want to do is to give our canvas a color. So we'll do that in the background, in the draw function. So here we'll put our draw function in, and we want to give it a background. Background in our p5js is for the color of the canvas. And I'll make this a dark gray, which will be 52. And utilizing colors here is pretty flexible. If I want to have some sort of grayscale, I can just put one number here. If I want it to be black, I could put 0. If I want it to be white, I could put 255. Right? It's the same kind of color structure that we've talked about before, where we have different RGB intensities from 0 to 255. And we can actually put 3 values here if we want an RGB color. And there are different color modes, if you look at the references, that you can use that will change the color mode that's being rendered to the browser. So if we save this now, and we go back to our live site, we'll see that now we have a dark gray canvas background here. So now we see the area that we're actually working with here. So what I would like to do here is let's start out by just putting a shape on here. And let's try to get it as close to the center as we possibly can, which would be pretty interesting. So in anything that we're wanting to draw on the canvas, we'll do that in our draw function. And let's do a rectangle because we've looked at a rectangle. So one of the interesting things about p5js is that if you want to change the color of something, you apply the color to it first. So if I want to change the fill color of this shape, I'm going to start out by applying my fill function here. And in between these parentheses, I can give it some sort of data that will make it a color, right? Like if I want this to be, say, magenta, because I think magenta pops really nicely against this dark gray background, I can set this at 255, comma 0, comma 255. Full intensity red, no green, full intensity blue. Makes magenta. And so now from here, I can create a rectangle object, right? And so remember that when we're essentially dealing with any shape, it's X location, Y location, width, and height. So let's say I want to create a 100 by 100 square here, put it in the center of my canvas. Rectangle. Not reflect. Again, that's something that you're going to have to pay attention to. I want rect. We'll just click off somewhere. Click back. So X location is going to be W divided by 2 minus 50. I believe how that's handled. Because I think it places in the middle of the object versus in a corner. We might have to adjust that a little bit. Because I don't quite remember. But we'll do the same thing for the Y location, which will be Y divided by 2 minus 50. This is going to be a square of 100 by 100. So we just have this X location, this Y location, and that should be H here instead of Y. I didn't call that Y. I called that H. So now if we look on our live site, we've got a roughly centered square here. I think that is centered. And one of the cool things about this is if you want to save this as a picture, you can right click, you could save the image as, and just save it. And one of the things that we might do next time is I made like an automatic wallpaper creator that uses like an algorithm to generate circles, and then it automatically saves the wallpaper. That might be something fun for us to make next time. Like there's actually a function inside of p5.js that will save the canvas as an image for you, which is pretty cool. So we'll leave that there. And we'll do something else before we go. Right? Because we're running, I mean, we've almost hit our hour mark. We're definitely going over our hour mark. Because what I'd like to do is sort of do an advanced version of our ball bounce program that we have in our module. But I want to do it, I want to do multiple balls, basically, which is going to require a ball object. Right, and this is something that I do, if you imagine, kind of go with me if you will, because like I do like a game development camp for like middle school and high schoolers over the summer. So, when we're talking about making balls bounce, at that point, it's a little weird, but like, it's okay, right? It's pretty common. So let's just create this and go with it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create an object. And we're going to create this object as a class in p5.js. I'm going to create a class called uppercase B ball. When we're creating a class in any programming language, we typically start it with an uppercase letter just to kind of delineate it from anything else. Right, and so in this, I'm going to add a constructor. And inside of this constructor, I'm going to put some arguments. Right, because what I might like to do is maybe randomize some values based on some conditions or whatever. And I really don't have to do this here. Like I could do this a little bit differently, but I kind of like doing it with the arguments and letting some other things kind of manipulate where, what happens and where things go. So I'm going to put an X, I'm going to put a Y, and I'm going to put a diameter, a dia here. Right, and this will allow us to, as we're generating the balls, we can generate them of different sizes, and put them at different locations on our canvas. Right? And so inside of this constructor requires our this keyword. So we can just say this dot x equals x, this dot y equals y, this dot dia equals dia. And then we're going to create a direction value here because we're going to need to move this. So we're going to use this direction value in another function that's going to be inside of this class. So we'll say this dot x dir for x direction equals, let's say 3. And this dot y dir for y direction equals, we'll say 3 as well. Right? And this is also something that we could pull in if we wanted to. We don't have to, right? This is also to kind of show that there's other things that we can do here. So when we create a new object based on this class, we'll pass it some values. And the values that we pass it will become the values for this element. And so when we create this, we will let it do its thing, basically. Right? So this constructor will allow us to pass data into it. We can also put different functions into here. Right? Like I can put a move function into here. Like that. Right? And so now this move is a part of this class. So when I create a new object, I can create and display that object. And then I can move that object by calling the move class here. And so we'll just do kind of something similar to our ball bounce that we did in the module, right? We'll just move it this dot x plus equals our x direction. And that would be our this dot x dir, this dot x dir, this dot y plus equals this dot y dir. And then we want a conditional to bounce it when it hits the walls. So if this dot x is less than this dot dia divided by 2, or this dot x is greater than w minus this dot dia divided by 2. Then we'll take and we'll multiply x direction by a -1. So that's this dot x dir times equals -1. And we can just take this conditional statement and we can just copy it for y and just replace all the pertinent information. So if this dot y, this dot dia, this dot y, h minus y dir. And so now when we move our balls, they'll actually bounce off the walls of our canvas. And finally, we'll write a little function to display it. I'd like for these circles to be a random color, right? Which I think would kind of be fun. So let's write a little display function here. We'll add a fill in here, and we'll use our randoms. We can use math.floor, math.random, which is what I demonstrated in the module. P5js also has a random function built into it. So we can put random here, and in parentheses a starting number, comma, an ending number. So in this case, since we want a random colored circle, it'll be between 0 and 255 for all of these. Random 0, comma, 255. Random 0, comma, 255. So that will give me a random number between 0 and 255 for my red value, for my green value, for my blue value. And then we can create our ellipse using this dot x, this dot y, this dot dia, and this dot dia to make it a circle. So that's x location, y location, circumference on the width, circumference on the height, or not circumference, diameter on the width, diameter on the height. That's why we use dia. It's for diameter. So now I have this class here that will allow me to create some objects of ball, which will allow me to create multiple balls. I can use this to create multiple balls of multiple sizes, of multiple colors, and have them bouncing around my canvas. Right, so now all we have to do is kind of create all the balls, which in order to do that, we'll use an array, which will be pretty fun. So let's just create an array here. Just anywhere in our program, we can create an array. I'm just going to give it a variable, and I'm going to call it lowercase b balls, and I'm going to set that equal to an empty array. Right? We learned how to work with arrays, so we can work with that. In my setup function here, I'm going to write a for loop that will just create me a certain specified number of balls. So for var I equals 0, let's create 10 balls, let's say. So I is less than 10, I plus plus. During that, we will push to that balls array. So that's balls.push. We learned that already. A new ball. So a new object based on our ball class that has a random start value on the x location. So we'll say random 0, comma, width. And we can say width minus since we're going with 100 here, we can say width minus 50, just so it doesn't start like past the wall. Same thing for our y. We can do a random, and actually we can make that, instead of 0, we'll make that 50, so it doesn't start past the wall there either. Same thing here. We'll take and make this random somewhere on the y-axis, so between 50 and h minus 50. And then we'll put in our diameters here, which is going to be 100, comma, or actually just 100. 100 is all we need, because we just have one value for diameter here in our constructor. So it's going to take this first value, it's going to generate a random number, put that in here, generate a random number, put that in the y, put the 100 in the dia, and it'll do that for each object and create just a random object. And so then all we have to do from here is run these functions in our draw loop. So we've created a new object for each ball that we want to generate. We're going to generate 10 balls. We created a new object based on our class here. It's going to take those, it's going to push them to this array. And then in our draw function, we are going to just write a for of loop. So for let ball of balls. So that will iterate over that array. We will ball.display. So that will run that display function that's a part of that constructor, or a part of that class. So we haven't moved them yet. So one of the things that we could do here is just save that see what we end up with. Right, and we can see those colors just going crazy there. Right, because it's looping through and generating a new color for those constantly. So we might want to do something with that that would maybe call those colors differently. Maybe we call them in maybe we create them in the setup function. So maybe instead of this, we add a R, G, and a B here to our object. Add a this.r equals this random number. Or actually, we wouldn't even need to put those in our object. We could just add them. We could just create them here. So it'll generate them one time instead of looping through it. This dot G equals a random number. And this dot B equals a random. I think this will work. We might have to do it. We might have to try to do it the way that I was going to do it there. Let's see what this does, and we might have to change up just a little bit. So like if I put in here, I would then put in here this dot R, this dot G, this dot B. Let's see what that does. That might still have them. Okay, that does what I want it to do. So we have a random colored circle here of some color. We're displaying them. You can see they're all in random locations based on how the object was created. So now all we need to do is we need to just run this move function on all of them, and that'll get them to bounce. So inside of my for of loop, under ball.display, we will ball.move. And we'll have 10 randomly bouncing balls here. Now we can see here they're kind of grouped up. It's because they're all kind of moving in the same direction. If we can do something different here, if we wanted to kind of bring in another value. To try to make them start in a different direction. Or to make some of them start in a different direction. Let me try to think of how we would do this here. Because I know it'd probably be with... it would have to work with this.dire. Maybe we could create another, just to kind of do it quickly, we can create a var var directions and put in them 1 and -1. So var directions equals 1, comma -1, have another little array there. So then we can take our number 3, multiply it by directions with an index location that is random between 0 and 1. So we'll start out, when we create these, we'll see if this works. Right, we can also bring in a random value here for the direction. That'll be a speed value, so it'll move more at a certain time, right? So we can try that as well. Let's save that, see if this works. Oop. Nope, apparently it didn't like that. Let's see if we can... Let's see if we're getting an error in our console here. We are not. I think maybe just moving it. Maybe just moving them at a different speed might be helpful. So maybe we could just put a random number here. random 1 comma 5. Same thing here, put a random number here, random 1 comma 5. So they'll all have different speeds. That might help a little bit. Yeah, that helps it make it feel a bit more chaotic. Some of them are moving faster, some of them are moving slower. And they're all bouncing off the walls when they're hitting the walls. Which is pretty good. We like that. That is something that we like. Now you might see there that they all have a little stroke around them. There's a little black stroke around all of them. One of the things that we might want to do here is get rid of that stroke. We can do that in our display here if we add the no stroke function in there. That'll get rid of that stroke. And now we have circles moving at all sorts of different speeds, just bouncing around. All different colors, all different speeds, bouncing around our canvas here. Let's get rid of that directions because we're not using that. Cool. So that's a whole lot of fun. So that's all that we'll go ahead and do for today. I think that's plenty. Hopefully you were able to follow along with that pretty nicely. If not, you know, it's a video. You can rewind it. Rewind the recording there when we get it back. If you have any questions while you're watching the recording, if you're watching the recording later on, just let me know and we can work it out. Hopefully you can see this is pretty easy, right? Like we didn't have to do all this stuff with the constructor and the object, right? We only did that because we wanted all these multiple balls and we wanted to do them in a quick and easy way. So this is fine. But that's all that I have for you for today. We'll turn the music back on just in case anybody here is live with me to and ask any questions here today. Again, if you're watching the recording and you have questions, please let me know. But that's all that I have for you for today. Next time we'll do some more just straight up coding. Thank you for watching. We'll see you next time.